It has been said that no fighter in this era of the UFC entered the top 15 of their division with more pressure on their shoulders than Islam Makhachev, tasked with reaching the heights already touched by his longtime friend and training partner Khabib Nurmagomedov. The Eagles' legions of passionate fans didn't just think that Islam would be champion. In their mind, it was a certainty. But Makhachev's life has always been one that has been filled with a healthy ability to deal with pressure, and the signs of greatness were there very early on. Raised in the village of Burshi, a remote settlement of less than 100 people, childhood bullies taught Makhachev everything he needed to know about dealing with adversity. But the first true breakthrough in his pursuit of greatness came when he moved to the Dagestan capital of Makhachkala, finding himself just a few doors from Abdul Manap and Khabib Nurmagomedov, a father-son duo who would forever change his future. Islam began training in the art of combat sambo, noticing that he had an affinity for combat in his youth. By the time 2000s were coming to an end, Islam, Khabib, and a large portion of their team had started to dedicate themselves to mixed martial arts. He turned pro in 2010, debuting with a unanimous decision victory before fighting 5 times in 2011. He won all 5, of course, finishing 4 of them. It was too soon to know just how far he could go, but after going 7-0 with one single appearance in 2012, his new promotional home, M1 Global, would give this young fighter the perfect platform to make his rise. By this point, Khabib had started to make a name for himself, and fans of the UFC were already marveling at this intense style of Dagestan wrestling. Little did they know that a wave was coming, one that would shape an entire era of the sport. If you are enjoying this content and want to see more videos like this, drop a comment and subscribe to our channel to never miss out on any of our upcoming videos. Islam finally got his chance in the UFC, making his record a clean 12-0 with a second-round rear naked choke of Leo Kuntz that put his name on the map.
It is all over! Beautiful job by Makhachev.
Sure, he was a little more than a prospect at this point in time, but with Khabib making his own rise, word started to spread that another future great from the same camp was making waves.
Another very dangerous fighter from Dagestan.
His second, however, would see a lot of that momentum come crashing down. UFC 192 was the event, and his opponent, Adriano Martins, was about to pull off one of the biggest shocks of 2015, TKOing Islam in under 2 minutes of the first round. Instantly, questions over Makhachev's striking were rampant, as many fans laughed off any ideas about him becoming a champion. But while the general MMA fanbase and his fellow fighters were talking, Islam was preparing to make his return, honing his striking into a much greater threat, a more polished and functional approach than it had been before. And after winning against Nick Lentz and Chris Wade back-to-back, Islam brought his striking to the fore in a huge way, KOing the only man to have ever given Khabib's wrestling trouble in Gleison Tibau. And he did it in under a minute. Cajun Johnson was another fighter who had some solid momentum behind him, but Islam barely needed a round to get the job done, securing the fight-ending armbar with laser-like precision. A newly signed talent who may well challenge for UFC gold one day served as Makhachev's next outing, Arman Tsarukyan, an incredibly young fighter with all the potential in the world. And if you haven't watched this fight, check it out. It is a masterclass from both men, one that Islam very clearly proved himself to be greater in. By this time, Khabib was already the champion at 155 pounds, and word started to spread that many top 15 lightweights were avoiding signing to fight Islam. Cause hey, if you've got a pretty little number beside your name and the UFC tried to throw you in there with an unranked guy who just so happens to be cut from the same cloth as the dominant champion, can you blame them? But Islam was still improving at a rapid pace, and the 3 fights he used to edge into the 10 to 15 range at lightweight showed it. Davi Ramos, Drew Dober, Thiago Moises, all solid wins, but the marquee fights would soon come.
I just won a title fight, no more. I'm tired about all this.
It is not Islam's fault that several big names either turned him down or simply fell out of fights due to injury. Hell, it happened to Makhachev himself. But after absolutely decimating both Dan Hooker and Bobby Green in quick succession, the UFC knew they needed to act.
why he is nothing to be played with.
Well, you want style points. How about it? 9 in a row for Islam.
Khabib was gone, retired, and in his place, Charles Oliveira had turned himself into perhaps the most universally beloved champion of his era. A fighter that dangerous is always going to ask questions of you, even if you have a formidable base in the seemingly perfect Dagestani fighting system. Or at least, that's what we thought. Islam had already showcased his clear improvements, but in there with the Bronx, it was his striking that really came to the fore. He even knocked down Charles in the second round before cutting through the defenses of the greatest submission threat in UFC history like they weren't even there. The arm triangle was locked in, and the lightweight division finally crowned a new champion.
Islam Makhachev submits Charles Oliveira to win the title! Wow!
But the next fight in Makhachev's career would without question spring up the most surprises of all. Alexander Volkanovski was indeed the pound-for-pound number one, as well as the featherweight champion when the time came for him to shoot for the champ status. But so many fans barely gave him a fighting chance in this one. Daniel Cormier, who, let's be real, has close ties to Team Khabib, went as far as to say that if Volk won, it would be the greatest upset in UFC history. Well, dare we say it, he very nearly did just that.
I didn't see this short guy. Bring him here.
The lightweight on the line, pound for pound number one on the line.
Every great fighter needs a great rival to really showcase their greatness. And in the rising 145-pound king, Islam got just that. It is easy to focus on the underdog story of Alexander the Great rising up and finally getting the better of Makhachev in crucial moments. But let's not forget just how much Islam flipped the script, showing insanely good striking in the face of one of the very best in the business. Despite getting dropped in round 5, Makhachev had done enough to take 3 rounds. And though he did not claim the pound-for-pound number one position due to the nature of Volk's performance, even his biggest haters were forced to give him praise for his well-roundedness.
Islam Makhachev!
This is not the same fighter as Khabib. Islam Makhachev very clearly has his own skill set with its own difference to the Eagles. And considering how riveting his rise has been so far, we can't wait to see just how far he can push it, just how well-rounded he can become. And if they do decide to do Makhachev versus Volkanovski too, after both men make one more defense of their respective titles, you can guarantee that each man will have a whole new bag of tricks for the other to try and solve.
That's it! Islam Makhachev!
Outstanding wrestler.